Good morning. As Dharmini mentioned, it is Palm Sunday, and this represents the period in the life of Jesus Christ, as was described in the reading, that leads into Easter, which is essentially the celebration of his Mahasamadhi, his leaving the body consciously, but also his resurrection, and the great miracle that demonstrated his conquering of this material world and conquering Maya. In such a dark time, in the sense of unenlightened time, it was the period of Kali Yuga, where the dominant consciousness of man on this planet is that matter is the reality, that it's only solid things. The concept of energy is has not occurred to people yet, and so a dramatic miracle was needed to demonstrate to people that there was something more that could overcome matter, and what could be more seemingly permanent or more dramatic than death itself. And to see someone who conquers death, well, that really was something. And of course, it's true for us even now. If we've ever heard of such a thing happening, there were stories of that in Master's life, where he brought people back from the dead, where Sri Yukteswar resurrected himself. So we have some very dramatic examples here too. The thing is that, as I said, a very strong example was needed to get it into people's consciousness at that time, but also just so that it would go on throughout the ages. And of course, Jesus Christ was a master, he was an avatar, and like other avatars, incarnations of God that have come again and again to this planet to help, they play a large outer role on the stage of life. Those who come to basically found a new religion, which is to say a new pathway to God. New meaning appropriate for the time that they come, and helpful to the needs of the people then. It isn't a different path in the sense that it leads to a different goal, but it's a path that gives a particular emphasis to help the people, to be relevant for the people. And after time passes, then a new emphasis is given to match the growing understanding of humanity, if we're in an ascending yuga, or the sort of diminishing understanding of people. And so you might ask, well, what does that mean? Well, obviously, as we grow more aware of energy in this Dwapara Yuga, the second age, if you're not familiar with the yugas, forgive me. You can look them up and read about them. To get into them would take too much time here. But as we understand more and more about energy being the prime force behind matter, that even matter itself is energy, then we can understand spiritual teachings in the language of energy. This is wonderful. In the next yuga, Sri Yukteswar, Yoganandaji's guru, tells us we will understand reality in terms of magnetism, in terms of mind power. And he said the subtle magnetism that exists. And he said, essentially, and I can't describe it further because you wouldn't understand it. It's just as much as energy is more subtle than matter. And some people, it seems fewer and fewer people disbelieve in energy now. Everybody believes in electricity. But, there was a time when Dharmini and I even were talking to somebody not that long ago about basically working with energy and trying to find ways to keep one's energy up. And the person made a mockery of our statement, just sort of, ha, 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 just in a rather, materialistic way. that materialism, matter is the reality and none of this sort of silly stuff. I don't know if that person would make the same statement now, because it's just so much in the media, in the culture, and everything that around the world that there is we can apply this concept of energy on many levels. But again, in time, as people's understanding deepens, even this concept of energy will become not subtle enough that we will see something even beyond it. Because even with our great understanding, there are many things still that we can't explain. Even resurrection, for example, and how to rematerialize the body. Even Master said, you can take a man's body and take all the atoms, and if you compressed all the atoms together, you could fit the man into a little box. He said a snuff box, and so all the atoms would fit in that. He said it would weigh just as much as the person, say 150 pounds or whatever it is, but it would just be that size. But he said, you know how you could get the body into that box, but you don't know how to get it out again. Generally, death is a one-way trip, so it seems. And I say that only because then it's followed by a rebirth. But again, we'll leave that to the side. So in a descending time, so there'll be some new expression of spiritual truth coming in Treta Yuga to then help update the understanding and make it relevant for the people then. Maybe we'll be among them. Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll have learned our lesson in this life with this teaching, and we will be free in God. And then maybe we can come back and visit, sort of like, I remember this prison, this used to be my cell, and ha ha ha, I'm free. And I can give you some advice if you're interested, or I'll pray for you. But in the descending times, it in a way when mankind's understanding becomes more and more limited, then it isn't that the truths get dumbed down. They do have to be focused, and some aspects have to be hidden because they wouldn't be understood. Jesus spoke in parables, it says, which is basically stories that have a symbolic meaning, a deeper meaning, intentionally. And he said repeatedly to his audiences, for those who have ears to hear, let them hear. And even that was a bit of a subtle statement, because it's sort of, I have ears to hear, and looking around, everybody seems to have ears to hear, except that guy who only has one ear. But no, I'm joking. But so, what does that mean? But of course it meant for those who can understand my meaning, who can tune in and grasp it intuitively. And ultimately, the masters have said in the descending ages that it is time to, if you want to focus on God, you have to basically retire from this world and focus on God in seclusion or on your own or whatever it is. And you can't be in the world and also find God. That is no longer true. And that's one of the challenges on the spiritual path, coming into this, again, rising time of understanding where people still feel that pull of, they may feel, it's too bad I have all these worldly responsibilities and I have all this thing I have to look after, and even these desires I have, and I also want to find God, but I don't have the lifestyle of a monk or a cave dweller. And that isn't God's purpose. I don't know why we think that, if we do. Maybe it's because it's sort of still part of the path that was before this time, so it's kind of in the consciousness that that's how it used to be, and we can mistakenly think that's how it still is. Or it's just because of our own past lives living that way and decidedly making a point of living that way, and now seeming to go against that. But the point we should always make is to live in tune with God. Live in tune with what God is asking of us. That should be our highest standard, not the particular form. As Swamiji said, you can listen for intuitive guidance from God that tells you to go, say, for example, east. but then keep listening if you're trying to get somewhere, because he may then end up telling you to turn and go north. But if you've only heard step 1 and just charge ahead and are done with listening, it may take longer. You may miss the point. Our commitment, again, should not be to what God said, but to God himself and what he is saying now. And that may change from, according to our own needs and according to our own ability to understand. So this week is, it's not really like Navaratri ending in Dussehra or Vijaya Dashami, but it's a concept of a period of, of holy days, a sequence of them, not just one. And so that is what we'll be celebrating with Easter next week. What's interesting about this time, and as Swamiji comments in the reading, he says that the question, who is this Son of Man? And this was asked of Jesus. And Swamiji makes the point very clearly that Jesus appeared like a human being, but he had a divine nature, and the things he did that were like other people, he ate and smiled and all these things, that still he had a godly consciousness. And this is a very important teaching, especially at the beginning of the spiritual path, and it's good to keep in mind throughout, that though we may see the Master as a human being, he's much more than that. Swamiji said when he first came to Master, he saw him as a very wise man. You could say that was perhaps the highest understanding that Swamiji had at that point consciously. I think he had a much deeper awareness of it, but anyway, this is how he tells the story. And then he said Master met him one day and gazed deeply into his eyes and said, "If you knew my consciousness." Later, meaning some time later, some years later, one disciple of Yoganandaji said to Swamiji, "Every time I think I've understood Master, I find he's much greater than that." Which can sound very, how nice. But Swamiji's comment, maybe not out loud, but certainly, in his mind, was, how could anyone think to understand him? His nature is so beyond us. As Master said when to some people, when you understand the Guru, then you will be like the Guru. You can't, you have to have that same level of consciousness. We have to acknowledge how far beyond our present experience it is, not in the sense of being above, apart, and we are so much lesser and limited. But in fact, it's our destiny to be that way. That's our goal, but not to be that, but to be in God. Just as the Guru is in God if he's self-realized, so we too want to be in God. And so too the Guru wants us to be in God. He has an active interest in this, and interested in those who want the same goal, who want the same love, to share that same love that he has or she has. So when we see whatever we see as a divine expression, we should always look behind that and tune in on a deeper level, knowing that there's a divine nature expressed. And that's not always easy. Swamiji again tells the story of how he was looking at Master in a group, and he was seeing Master but thinking, okay, he's standing over there, but he's not there. He's inside of me, and he's everywhere, sort of getting very omnipresent with this aspect of Master's reality. And Master walked over to him and handed him an apple, as if to say, don't overlook the human element of our relationship too. You see, the spiritual path in a way seems to be about opposites, but it's really both and. It isn't opposites of either or even that the truth is in the middle, though it is. It's about both things coexisting rather than thinking it has to be one or the other. And so this split between human consciousness and divine consciousness is a very real thing. And as I said at the beginning of the spiritual path, we come to the path with only our human understanding. We may have a deeper grasp of these things intuitively, which I'll come back to in a moment. But we can only really see things according to our present understanding and experience. That's natural. So if, for example, somebody doesn't believe whatever it is we're saying, like that man when we talked about energy at Dharmini Night did, and he didn't accept it, well, maybe that's because it hadn't been something that he had experienced yet. And so there's no reason to get offended or to argue, well, there is energy, even if you don't think so, because what does it matter? It is there. It's the truth that matters. And maybe one day he'll have that experience and maybe he'll see it. And there are many things that are beyond my experience that I hope will one day be within that experience, and that I will, expand my own understanding. It's always good to be a student of life. And Sri Yukteswarji said, we are hypnotized by our own experience, and we can't see past it. And so we can, however, see past it with the tool of intuition. In other words, mentally, logically, with the conscious mind, we may not be able to see anything beyond our experience except as a mental affirmation, as a belief, as a guess, or even an imagination of, well, I haven't seen the spiritual eye, say, in meditation, but I've seen a picture of what it's been drawn as, and so I will imagine that I see it, maybe not in meditation, but out of meditation or in other places. I will imagine seeing something. I will imagine having an experience that I haven't had yet, but the masters have told me is real, so I draw that experience closer to me. That's a very good use of imagination, Master said. Now, we can perceive beyond our outward experience, though, with intuition. And so, for example, though we may come to a spiritual teacher or our guru and have a lot of mental questions, and or just have a sort of limited mental view of who he is, that inwardly, though, something may be telling us there is a power here. There is a joy here. This person is not like other people you've met. These teachings, these books, this feeling, this environment is not typical. There is something special here, and there's something special here for you. We may feel that. And a lot of times people are drawn onto the path, sometimes in spite of their doubts, because something inside is pulling. And it could be, yes, a past life memory, which might be able to be called an intuition, I'm not sure. But if it has power to push us, then it really is, and especially if it keeps us. So, meaning keeps us on the path. So we can really tune into that, and we can trust it to an extent. Swamiji said we can trust our intuition one step beyond our experience. In other words, you can take a leap of faith, one leap of faith, not 10 leaps of faith beyond. That then it would be presumption that, well, God will just do it and take care of me and I know. No, we can take a big step, but not more than that, because, you can try it and you see where it leads you. So the thing then to tune into is that we have to know the Guru is more than we see. And the Guru himself is dealing with this human and divine consciousness. So Master asked Swamiji something about somebody. Did this happen or tell me about the situation. And Swamiji, understanding Master's consciousness, said, well, sir, but don't you know? I mean, if he's omnipresent, certainly he knows everything, and so couldn't he just sort of access his omniscience and just know it? I mean, why ask Swamiji? I think was part of what was behind that question. And Master said to him, my job is very difficult, balancing my human nature and my divine nature, and it's important for basically you all to help me in this, in not in balancing the nature, but if I ask you about so and so, to tell me about that, and so on and so on. And then he said, either at that time or another time, remember, I know what lies ahead for you. You don't. You must be in tune with my will. You must follow my teachings, because I know what's coming. And Swamiji said, sir, do I follow your will? And Master said, in all the important things you follow my will. So, which is, of course, a very encouraging thing to hear. Now, I had that same experience with meeting Swamiji, that on the one hand, I was trying to relate to him according to what a great man or an accomplished, person might be. That's sort of what I envisioned, how I would be relating to him. Here is a famous author or composer or spiritual teacher, because I didn't have any experience with spiritual teachers before him. But when I met him for the first time, the power that I felt, the energy that I felt up the spine, as Dharmini was mentioning earlier, the thrill was unlike anything I had ever experienced. And it was not of the conscious mind. I didn't even understand it, but I felt it. And it was enough to basically draw me to that experience and to him as the vehicle or the channel for that experience, and to say, wow, I want that. I want more of that. And it was also very calming, very still. It wasn't just excitement and nervousness. And that experience continued and deepened. And so that's something, again, we can have with his recordings, with his words. I was speaking to some people just yesterday who were sharing the power that they had felt, either through a Zoom satsang or ceremony, not unlike this one, or through reading Swamiji's books, or as one person was listening to Swamiji's books being read by Swamiji, an audio book of the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and that the power that his voice had for him. We have to remember that that's a two-way thing, that there's a lot of power coming from, for example, Swamiji, but there's also the capacity or the affinity in us to recognize it, to be touched by it, to feel it. Not everybody hearing that would necessarily feel it. Maybe they have another guru, for example, and that's fine, and they have another spiritual family, of course. Wonderful. But when we have that recognition ourselves, it's important to take note of it. On the other hand of this human-divine balance, we have to also acknowledge the human side, not in the sense of limited, but in the sense that the human level of reality is a reality. That's part of what Master, I think, was saying by offering the apple to Swamiji, and as Swamiji himself commented, that it was, let's also have this kind of relationship. Swamiji enjoyed, for example, having people, for example, at a satsang or at a tea, who enjoyed sort of a witty exchange of words, of making fun little comments or observations, or asking thoughtful questions. He did say that though the guru may have, not speaking of himself as the guru, but he's speaking of Master, but we saw it also in Swamiji, that though the guru may have a sort of personality affinity with someone else, may share certain commonalities on a human level, that's not at all necessarily correlated with the spiritual level. Meaning that even if the guru appears outwardly close with somebody and not close with somebody else, just based on personality, it may not be that way at all. He gave the example of Sri Yukteswar and Master, when that disciple Kumar came to Sri Yukteswar, and Sri Yukteswar had a fondness for Kumar because Kumar was neat and orderly and had a very sharp mind, like Sri Yukteswarji. But when Sri Yukteswar placed Kumar in charge, and he was a tyrant, and all the disciples, meaning Kumar was, and all the disciples came to Master, who used to be in charge of the ashram's activities, and now was placed in the lowly position of cook or assistant cook or something like that. Kumar came to Sri Yukteswar complaining that all the disciples follow Mukunda, Yogananda's name at that time, and not me. And Sri Yukteswar said, that's why I assigned him to the kitchen and you to the parlor. You know, that he was just saying, look, anyway, you know what he was saying. So it's even Master comments in the Autobiography of a Yogi that the inexplicable law of attraction and repulsion, even evident on the level of a master, who can explain it? Something like that. I'm paraphrasing badly. But that Sri Yukteswar gave everything he had to Master. Why? Because Master also drew that. And Master's nature, in a way, was very different from Sri Yukteswar's. Master himself said it was rather alarming to have a guru who spoke in terms of cold spiritual mathematics, when Master's own nature was very devotional. And yet, of course, he found his own devotional nature growing under Sri Yukteswar's guidance and in his presence. Because most of all, the guru works through magnetism. But coming back to this human and divine balance, we have to remember also, because later on the spiritual path, people can make the mistake of looking at the avatar as something just so beyond our experience, so beyond our capacity, that all you can do is fall down and worship, and then more or less go about your lowly life, because you don't have a chance of being anything like that. And so it's a balance between reverence, respect, and knowing this is far beyond my present level of experience, and that's what I want. And that's what I will have one day. As Swamiji said in the reading, even the lowliest beggar will one day, have a story greater than the, greatest epic ever written. We do have a divine destiny, and that's partly, I think, the conflict inside of us, because sometimes we can feel self-doubt, or we can feel the limitations of this world, meaning our own world circumstances, our own life circumstances, our own environment, and so on, and feel sort of a frustration or a pushing up against that I know there has to be more than this. And we may feel the limitations of our own mind. As Swamiji said, when he was trying to seek God, he went out into nature before meeting Master, and he saw a beautiful dewdrop on a leaf. And he said, it's beautiful, but I can't feel it. He said, I felt like a 6-cylinder engine running on one cylinder. He was aware he should have a greater capacity for perception, for feeling, for joy. And somehow it wasn't coming. I think many devotees feel some aspect of that I know there's more than what I'm experiencing. Everyone on earth, to some extent, has that feeling, because we look for happiness. We look for more happiness than we have. And we first look for it in, materialistic ways, because that's the obvious thing. The senses are how I experience or feel anything, so let me have good sensory experiences. But then we find that those don't last. And so then we try to move beyond that to good emotional experiences. Forget what circumstances I'm in, as long as I'm with my beloved, or as long as I'm with my beautiful friends and family, then I will be contented. And we find in time that even that is fleeting. It's an aspect of God's love, human love, but it isn't God's love. And it comes and it goes. As Swamiji said in the reading, smiles of welcome one day, and then shouts of persecution the next. Sometimes it can just be so confusing. Why is this person so mad at me? I don't understand. Why are they treating me this way? It's partly the nature of this world. It's Divine Mother trying to help us to grow, to say, if you love this more than me, or you think the ultimate joy is in this, I will have to show you that there's something more. And the way I will show you is by this going away. As the beautiful poem, The Hound of Heaven says, all things betray thee, who betrayest me. Meaning, if you don't love God first, God is saying, if you don't love me first, all these other things will betray you. Not as a punishment, but just because they can't fill those shoes, to mix the metaphor. They can't give us that joy. They can't fill the empty space in our hearts. They're incapable. And sooner or later, we will discover that. It's just sort of like the law of gravity. It isn't even personal. It can feel personal. It can hurt quite a lot, but it's just the way things are. So as Master said, don't seek the smiles where the smiles don't come from. And so every time we discover a place, well, I guess the smiles don't come from there either, then leave it and go to where you can find joy. On the spiritual path, if you find joy in chanting, chant more. If you find joy in meditation, meditate more. In reading books, listening. In other words, do what works, do what's easy. Because it's hard to stay focused with Maya and, in this case, COVID and whatever else going on. There's a lot of distraction. And one, difficult aspect is the physical separation we're having to endure a little longer. And then it'll be a great rejoicing. But still, so we have to find easy ways to keep ourselves centered and going deep. But we have to remember, too, that the masters, the avatars, went through what we went through. It's sort of like a kindergartner looking up at someone who graduated college and saying, wow, all the things that they know. But that is the kindergartner's destiny one day, and from LKG all the way up. And so, it doesn't do any good to worship the avatars in that way. Master said, if God sent down a fully perfected being to parade around this earth and do miracles and all this, it would be useless, because all people would do would just bow and worship it. There would be no teaching involved, because it would be utterly impossible for them to achieve. That Jesus and the other avatars are not divine robots just sent down to practice miracles and be adored. It isn't that way at all. Jesus himself said, to he who overcomes, even as I myself overcame, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and so on. But basically that phrase, even as I myself overcame, saying, I went through it too. And so we have to remember that aspect. And as Master said, it's difficult to balance. Swamiji, seeing Master, said it was difficult to balance. But when, for example, someone left the path, Master would weep sometimes. And Swamiji once came in with some other monks, and they found Master weeping, and he said, so-and-so is going to leave the path. Let us pray for him. And the man did leave the path, but they did pray for him. But you see, Master, he didn't cry on only a human level, but he acknowledged the human level too. And that's helpful for us, because we have the human level, and we don't want to feel that it's wrong. We want to acknowledge that I don't want to remain on the human level, but we don't want to criticize ourselves or think, because I know better, then I should behave better, which of course is true, but that if I wasn't able to, it's because I'm insincere or impure or unworthy or all the... If you have a negative voice in your head, just tell it to, go bother somebody else. It's not useful. And so that there are many more forces at work. I mean, one of Maya's tricks is to make us do the wrong thing and get us to blame ourselves for doing it. Master said, give the blame to God. He likes that when you do that. And I thought, how could God like it when we blame him for something wrong that we did? And I think part of it is because when we blame ourselves, we tend to shrink or hide or curl up into a ball and forget God or not trust God or even hide from God to say, he must think I'm so terrible. It's just not that way at all. Just as an ideal parent always forgives the child and says, look, it's my job to help you no matter what. Divine Mother and Heavenly Father are so much more than that. Through lifetimes, they are helping us and aching for us to return. And so So let us also understand that when we suffer in this world, it is only for one purpose. I'm not trivializing suffering. I don't mean it's, not real. It's very real. But it is only for the purpose that we are having to discover once again that this world is not our home. If something goes wrong, if something's disappointing, if something is unsafe, harsh, cutting, all these things, and we feel, oh my gosh, how could it be that in my home this could happen? Well, either this is my home and it's awful, or this isn't my home. And so, if it's awful, let me go. Not leave the world, in an unnatural way, but let me go to my home, even just inside, by doing Kriya. Let me retreat to my inner kingdom, to that inner safety. That phrase Master said, the inner invulnerability. And so, that is the lesson, that this world is not our home. And our hearts may break at times. Swamiji said, yes, it will hurt us in our human relationships if people hurt us. That is just a part of loving. It's the price we pay for loving, for giving love. And the focus should be on giving love, not necessarily on receiving it back in this way from this person in the way that I want. God will return that love in many ways and is returning that love. And so that feeling then that I know that I will be hurt, but as Swamiji said, for loving, he said, but the alternative is much worse, not to love at all. Who could live like that? So we should be brave and courageous, not foolish, but brave and courageous. But above all, we should love Master, we should love God, we should understand the suffering that does happen, that is a part of life. Master went through it too, again, not only on a human level, but he did. As I said, he wept when people left the path. He wept at Sister Gyanamata's funeral. I'm sure he wept at other times. Sometimes I think maybe he was weeping also as a channel for the disciples' grief, for showing them that it was okay to grieve on that level, also acknowledging the divine level, of course. But I say that because some people seeing him weeping didn't understand that and said, oh, Master's feelings got hurt. But anyway, both and. So I just wanted to close by saying, even Master, in the sense of this world not being our home, he had a song in Bengali. There was a Bengali song that he would listen to, a record of, that come to me as sorrow and suffering, and the translation is roughly, come to me. God, come to me as sorrow and suffering, because in joy I can forget you, but when I suffer, I always think of you. And isn't it true, when we're hurt, we cry out for help, and when we're happy, we may just think, well, things are going fine, and I don't need to bother God. In fact, I seem to have things under control quite well. Haridas Ji says that Divine Mother gets lonely sometimes if we forget her, and so she may create a little chaos in our lives. He said, for example, sometimes she'll grab the finances because she knows it will get our attention. And so with this then, Master, this song, Come to Me as Suffering, at the end of his life, he said to Swamiji and others, I don't want to hear that song anymore. I've had enough of suffering. And in fact, he wrote this, Whispers from Eternity, that I wanted to close with. This is actually in the prayer demands. This is the very last one of that section. Number 217, the last one. It is simply called A Prayer, and then in parentheses, received after a great test of God. And that's the point. All these things are only tests of God. So if we want to have hand-to-hand combat, or we want to complain, or we want to feel what's happening to me, it's between us and God. So send our complaints to His doorstep rather than the channel through which the difficulties are coming. Master says, in disease or in health, in success or in failure, in poverty or in prosperity, in joy or in sorrow, in disaster or in safety, in life or in death, I stand immutably, unalterably, unshakably loyal, devoted, and firmly loving Thee, my Heavenly Father, forever, forever, and forever.